So John, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I want to say hello to everybody and thank you for joining us. And I want to pop us over to the presentation for today. So again, as Hannah said, we're going to be talking about the proposed rule for 2022. And it's a review of the changes from an industry-wide perspective, drilling down periodically to the agency level. And we do this because we believe that advanced planning does make a difference. Okay, so we're going to be talking about the projected effect to the industry overall, as well as the significant areas of change looking at the agency level, which as an operator should be your primary concern. Based on this premise, here come the following questions, polling questions that Hannah had been identifying. Okay, the first one is every CBSA service area has 432 unique payment rates. I'm just putting that out there for information. So CMS identified an increase of 1.7% in the proposed rule. The question is what is this an increase of? Okay, there are 4 responses. A is each of the 432 payment rates for all service areas. B is the average change of the 432 payment rates for each service area, meaning some will be higher, some will be lower, but the average will be the 432. C is the national standardized 30-day payment rate that's used to calculate what these payment rates are. And D is in total home health spending. So we'll give you like 30, 45 seconds to answer that, and then we'll take a look at what the results were. Nobody's going to be graded on this. This is all anonymous, so I appreciate some good participation in this. Okay. So here we see what the results were. There were 21% for A, 26 for B, 29 for C, and 24 for D. So you can take that down, Hannah. So as is the norm, it's pretty spread out. Okay. So now I want to, so you can take that down. Let's see. Okay, so now let's take a look at the next question. Okay, and that is based on the preceding, what should I, as an operator of a home health agency, expect the change in my Medicare revenue to be for 2022? Should I expect a 1.7% increase for all my 30-day payment rates? The average change of 1.7 for all my 30-day payment rates, meaning some will be better, some will be worse, but it's going to average out in each service area to be 1.7%. No change in my payment rate. Or D, this does not give me enough information to calculate it. So we'll give you another 45 seconds to answer this, and then we'll move forward. So, and again, nobody's being graded here. So, oh, Hannah, can you launch that second poll question?
I'm sorry, it's not pulling up the second poll question.
Okay, well, we'll move forward. We'll just look at the results that we had from the first polling question, because usually they more or less mirror each other. Okay, so here are the two polling questions. Okay, now I will tell you that the answer that we had, again, for the first question where we did get the results, you know, we had 21% voting for A, 26 for B, 29 for C, and 24 for D. And what you will generally see in other presentations, it appears that you should expect a 1.7% increase, whatever CMS says the change is the implication is you can expect that to be the change in your reimbursement rates. And that is wrong, okay? What CMS is identifying in each rule is what the change is in D, total home health spending. And since it is D, total home health spending, you do not know what the impact is going to be to your agency. If there was only one agency that covered the entire Medicare home health program, that agency would expect to receive a 1.7% increase based on this proposed rule. But that's not the way that it works, okay? So let's look at this from an agency level, okay? When we look at it by a CBSA service area, on a case-by-case basis, there's one service area out there that will see an individual payment rate increase by as much as 35%, having 424 of its 432 payment rates increase somewhere between 0.9 and 35.7%, and only having 8 rates decreasing somewhere between 0.16 to 14.2%. Conversely, a different CBSA service area out there is projected to have a max increase of only 3.5%, as opposed to the 35% we saw on the other one, with having only 2 of its 432 rates increasing in 2022, one of them at the 3.5%, the other one at the 3.2%, meaning 430 of the 432 payment rates will decrease, which will range between 0.07% to 34.6%. Which CBSA service area would you rather operate in? Well, obviously, it's going to be in the first one, the former. My question is do you know what the changes for your CBSA service areas are? So to take it a step further, the average CBSA service area in the program for 2022, okay, we'll see changes ranging from a max increase for a 30-day payment of 22.7% to a max decrease of 22.4%. So the payments, the average change for agencies in this that operate in these service areas is going to be somewhere in this range. Probably not at the extremes, but somewhere in this range. So it's hard to say whether the agencies in these locations will be winners or losers, because undoubtedly there's going to be some agencies in this the average service areas that will be winners, that will have their payment rates increasing, while there will be others in that same service area that will have their payment rates decreasing. So are you okay with that uncertainty? And that's based on an increase in home health spending as per the proposed rule of 1.7%. And this variability is more the norm than the exception to the rule for changes for each year's proposed and final rule. And proposed increases often decrease at the final rule. For example, the 2021 projected increase per the proposed rule was 2.6%. At the final rule, it was reduced down to 1.9%. So when you look at it, 2.6%, 1.9%, it doesn't seem that big a difference, but it's a 27% reduction to the original proposed increase. And the proposed increase is based on, approximately $18 billion in home health spending for the year. So that 27% reduction in the proposed increase is a pretty significant number. So bearing that in mind, do you think you should determine what the impacts to your payment rates will be for 2022 and every year thereafter? In my opinion, this is something that every agency should be doing every year and should have been doing since they entered the program. This is something that should have been done, should have been being done, that even predates PPS. Okay, just as I believe all agencies should analyze their resource utilization, because you're only provided a limited amount of resources to care for any given type of patient. And when you do this review, identify your resource utilization, it's quite the eye-opener because the resource utilization for like-kind patients can vary dramatically. And agencies should be doing monthly financial operational analyses. You close your books each month. You close your financials each month. And when you do that, you should be doing an analysis that combines your financial and operational results together, because that's how you're going to understand what your financials are trying to tell you over and above what your total revenue is, what your total expenses are, and what your bottom line is. The financial operational analysis is going to help you understand why you're generating the results that you are and help you be able to impact your business going forward. So the proceeding was looking at the projected Medicare revenue impacts at the agency level per this proposed rule. Okay, now we're going to dig into the rule itself and look at the changes proposed for 2022. So it's mostly going to be a big picture perspective. The first section and the biggest section we're going to look at are the proposed changes to home health PPS. This is what directly impacts our Medicare revenues. Home health spending is projected to increase by $310 million for 2022. So home health is expected to get $310 million more in 2022 than what's projected to be paid to it in 2021. That is the 1.7% increase from 2021, not the agency level change in revenues. And what CMS identifies in the proposed and final rule each year has never been what an agency should expect to be the impact to their change in their revenues. Some agencies will see an increase around this rate. My estimation is about 20 to 30% of the agencies in the program will see a change in their revenues that coincides with what CMS identifies in the proposed and final rule. But that means most agencies will not. If 20 to 30% of them will, that means 70 to 80% of them will not. Some will see an increase, but less than at the 1.7% level that's being changed, change in home health spending, while many others will actually realize a reduction in their Medicare revenues for 2022. So, and as previously noted, the only way to identify what the projected impact to your agency will be is to have it calculated. Now, there are a lot of moving parts impacting this change each year, and that is what is presented in the proposed and final rules each year. As they say, the devil is in the details. So the only way you're really going to understand it is having, read it. So let's get into some details here. The first thing I want to talk about is CMS's behavior assumption adjustment. This was something they originally set up in 2020, the first year of PDGM, and it was originally set to be an 8.01% adjustment, which means a cut in home health spending. They were going to say, we're going to give you X in home health spending, but we're going to reduce it by 8% because of this behavior assumption adjustment that they have come up with. Because of comments that were submitted by those in the industry, it was at the final rule that 8.01% reduction was reduced to 4.36% back in 2020. And this was a continuation of CMS's nominal change in the case mix weight adjustment, which CMS used from 2008 through 2019 to cut home health spending by over 20%. They didn't use it every year. They used it most years though. And in the aggregate, it reduced home health spending by over 20%, meaning if everything else would have stayed the same under PPS pre-PDGM and the nominal change in case mix weight adjustment not occurred, your Medicare revenue would have been 20% higher in 2019 than what it was. So I say, watch out for it to reappear again in the near future. What you just saw pop up there is an excerpt, and you'll see something like this come up numerous times throughout this presentation. And this is an excerpt from the proposed rule. I've just snipped it right out of there so you can see it. I've highlighted what I want you to look at. And it says, we being CMS, determined the calendar year 2020, that was the first year of PDGM, 30-day base payment rate was approximately 6% higher than it should have been and would require a temporary retrospective adjustments for calendar year 2020. Well, that year's over and gone, okay? And subsequent years, 2021 being one of those years, okay? Until a permanent prospective adjustment could be implemented in future rulemaking. Well, they haven't proposed one for 2022. So my expectation is they will come out and propose one for 2023. So that's something that we need to be on the watch for. Next point I want to talk about is the no pay wraps are changing to a notice of admission, an NOA. This is more or less a formality now, as we've known about this for a while, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. This is just an excerpt from the proposed rule where they are stating that they are making this change, a one-time notice of admission process starting in 2022. The notice of admission is going to be something very similar to the NOE, the notice of election that they have over in the hospice. One change of significance coincident with this change, though, is looking at the highlighted portion, starting in 2022, agencies will submit a one-time NOA that establishes the home health period of care and covers all contiguous 30-day periods of care until the individual is discharged from Medicare home health services. Okay, so currently, under the current no pay wrap, we have to submit a no pay wrap every 30-day payment period, at the start of every 30-day payment period. So that if we have a patient on our rolls for a 12-month period of time, we have to send in 24 no pay wraps during that 12-month period. Now, with this change over to the NOA, starting on January 1, 2022, that same patient, we would only have to send in a one-time NOA, because as long as that patient remains on our rolls and is not discharged, that NOA covers everything. Additionally, the late filing penalty still applies to NOA. So the late filing penalty that exists for the no pay wrap also is going to apply for the NOAs. And here's an excerpt of CMS and how they talked about the penalty. The highlighted section says, for the one-time NOAs for 2022 and beyond, we finalize the payment reduction if the agency does not submit the NOA for 2022 and beyond within 5 calendar days from the start of care. That is, if an agency fails to submit a timely NOA, the reduction in payment amount would be equal to a 1/30th reduction to the 30-day payment period amount for each day from the home health start of care until the date the agency submitted the NOA. Okay, so they give us an example. So in this example, they admit a patient on January 1. So they call that day 0. That's the start of the first 30-day period of care. You have 5 days from that date to submit the NOA for it to be considered timely. So you have until January 6th. Okay, if you submit an NOA on January 7th or after, that's going to trigger a penalty. Okay, and for LUPA situations, for a late filed NOA, the visits that were done prior to the submission of the NOA will be ignored. And you will not be able to bill the beneficiary. That will be the agency's responsibility. Next, the market basket update. This is our inflation adjusted update for the upcoming year. There's a whole lot in here that we could talk about. You almost need an economics degree to really understand what it is that they're talking about in here. One thing I really wanted to point out is that the MFP, which is the annual economy-wide private non-farm business multi-factor productivity adjustment that was something that was created by the Affordable Care Act back in 2010. So that's the Affordable Care Act, Patient Protection Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, they're all the same thing. We're going to see the issues from the Affordable Care Act show up several times throughout this presentation that are impacting us in home health, and I can tell you that not one of them is good for us. Okay, so we identify what the market basket, what the inflationary update initially is supposed to be. For 2022, it's supposed to be 2.4%. Excuse me, but then we have to reduce it for the MFP adjustment rate, and that's a minus 0.6%. So the net market basket update for 2022 currently is proposed to be 1.8%. I just wonder what it will be at final, because historically they seem to drop more often than they go up. Although in this instance, I would think that there should be a very good chance that that number should go up, because inflation is just increasing daily right now. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the home health wage index. First off, I want to point out that we in home health do not have a home health specific wage index. Hospitals have a wage index, SNFs have a wage index, hospice has their own wage index, but we do not have a home health specific wage index, even though the power, we've been asking for a home health specific wage index for 20 plus years. CMS uses the inpatient hospital data to determine our wage index. My question is do you think that reasonably represents home health? And I ask that because you look at what the cost of labor is in your market and compare it, what it costs for you to get an RN, for you to get an LPN, for you to get a PT, a PTA, etc. Is the cost that you have to incur to be able to get that kind of staff comparable to what the hospitals pay? And if it is, then it does reasonably represent your market. But there's plenty of markets out there that it does not. It costs the home health agency more to get those kind of employees. And then using the inpatient hospital data to set the wage index is basically detrimental to all the agencies that work in those kind of service areas. Now, there are 465 CBSA/service areas covered by Medicare. And the wage index is CMS's approach, their attempt to try to make the payment rates equivalent in all 465 CBSA service areas when considering the labor rate difference in the CBSA service areas. So when you take any given HIPS code, okay, the payment rate is going to be much different for an agency that's in rural Alabama as compared to an agency that's in San Francisco. And that is supposed to be what the wage index, the different wage indexes are trying to balance out. So of the 465 CBSA service areas, 226 are proposed to have an increase in their wage index for 2022. 234 are proposed to see a decrease, with 5 remaining the same. And when it comes to Medicare payment rates, holding everything else constant, not changing anything else except the wage index, okay? Service areas with an increase in their wage index will do better in 2022 than 2021. Their payment rates will increase. Conversely, agencies in a service area with a decrease in their wage index will see a reduction in their payment rates. So what's the impact at your CBSA service areas? These are things that you ought to know going into each year to try to estimate, to try to project what's going to be the impact to your revenues. LUPA thresholds. Okay, so I want to talk about LUPAs, and they're certainly a whole lot more complex under PDGM. Okay, now the thresholds are proposed to remain the same for 2022, which helps. Okay, so of the 432 HIPS codes, we have the following thresholds. You know, there's 94 HIPS codes with a LUPA threshold of 2, 130 with a LUPA threshold of 3, 128 at 4, 72 at 5, and 8 with a LUPA threshold of 6. And again, there's no changes. A question I often get is it important to know the LUPA threshold? And that's absolutely, okay, because you want to do what you can to ensure that you're going to get a full episodic, a full 30-day payment on the assumption that there is a need to provide that level of service for that patient. Because anytime you run into a LUPA situation, you're losing, you know, anywhere from $1,000 to $2,500 for that 30-day period. Additionally, you should never have a controllable LUPA encounter. There are controllable LUPA encounters and non-controllable LUPA encounters. Non-controllable LUPA encounters are going to be like if a patient exacerbates, goes into an acute care facility and you can't provide any additional visits for the rest of that 30-day period and a LUPA situation occurs. The patient moves away out of your service area. The patient passes away. Okay, these are uncontrollable situations. But if a LUPA occurs because we missed a visit and didn't make that up, then that's a controllable situation, which is likely going to cost us, you know, somewhere between $750 and $2,500, depending on the acuity level of the patient. And it's important to track and trend your LUPA encounter rates annually. Historically, LUPA episode encounters across, you know, throughout the industry have accounted for approximately 7% of all episodes in home health. See the following excerpt from the proposed rule. So over here on the right, we have this table that I've carved out of the proposed rule. And over on the right-hand side, we see the 3 columns, and we see calendar year 2018 and calendar year 2019 simulated in calendar year 2020. The first line underneath that is the total percentage of 30-day periods of care that result in a LUPA situation. Okay, so they said that it's 6.7% for 2018, 6.8% for 2019. That's right in line with the 7%. The only thing I have an issue with is 2018 and 2019 were pre-PDGM eras in which the documentation that we were providing CMS did not coincide with what we started presenting them in 2020, which was PDGM driven. But they took that pre-PDGM data from 2018 and 2019 and tried to recreate PDGM situations, and that's how they came up with those ratios. Now, 2020, I asked if the 8.6% LUPA rate seems reasonable, because I know plenty of agencies out there that were well in the double digits when it came into LUPA rates because of COVID. COVID caused many agencies LUPA rates to skyrocket. Next, I want to move on to case mix weights. Okay, as previously noted, each CBSA service area has 432 unique case mix weights, which is associated with a unique HIPS code. Okay, so the HIPS code is going to be the same across the country, and the case mix weight is going to be associated with that HIPS code. Okay, each creates a unique payment rate. So we have 432 HIPS codes, 432 case mix weights. We have 432 payment rates. Okay, so again, 432 HIPS codes with a case mix weight, so a unique payment. So each of these 465 service areas will have its own unique payment rate for any given HIPS code. And any change in the case mix weights impacts the associated revenue for each HIPS code. And it was just a few years ago, I think it was in 2018, that CMS decided that they would review and possibly adjust the case mix weights on an annual basis. Prior to that, they generally did that kind of review every 3 to 5 years or so. So there was some stability with the case mix weights for at least a short period of time. My question is do you think this potential change every year will really give CMS and the industry a good perspective on the accuracy of the case mix weights developed? I wonder about this, and the reason I wonder about this is does this become sort of the proverbial dog chasing its own tail? Okay, because there's 432 case mix weights, and the case mix weight is a numeric representation of a patient's acuity level. Okay, and in that's how CMS dictates how much resources should be provided to care for that patient. So are they going to, when there's 432 of them and they're changing them every year, they might have, for example, 232 case mix weights that they're dead on with, that they're providing really the proper amount of resources to care for those patients. But that means there's 200 case mix weights that they're not properly allocating resources with. And if they're changing these numbers year after year after year, are they really ever going to identify where they're doing well and where they're not doing so well? Again, there's 432 case mix weights. Now for 2022, 223 are proposed to increase, with the max increase being 15.94%, meaning CMS believes that 15.94% more resources are needed to care for this type of patient than what were provided in 2021. There are 209 proposed to decrease in 2022, with the max decrease being 26.73%, meaning CMS believes that they over-resourced this HIPS code, this case mix weight, 26.73%. They over-resourced at 26.73% in 2021, so that case mix weight's being reduced in 2022. And this affects Medicare payment rates. So again, just like the wage indexes, an increase in the case mix weight, holding everything else constant, is a positive, will positively impact agencies' revenue, whereas a decrease in the case mix weight will have a negative impact on Medicare revenue. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the 30-day standardized payment rate. Okay, I want you to remember an episode is still for 60 days as it coincides with the OASIS. What we're going to be talking about is the 30-day payment rate. Because pre-PDGM, there was only payment rate for each 60-day episode. Now under PDGM, there are 2 30-day payment periods possible for each 60-day episode. And the calculation of the payment rates starts with the national standardized 30-day payment rate. So here we're going to see the 2 tables for the 30-day national standardized payment rate. And on the top table, we have, this is for agencies that do submit the required quality data. The below table, the bottom table is going to be for agencies that do not submit the required quality data. So we'll see in columns 1, 2, and 3, both tables are the same. The difference starts in column number 4, where the bottom table, for those agencies that do not submit the required quality data, their update is reduced 2 percentage points. So it's 0.998 as opposed to the 1.018 in the above table. And then we use that to come over to get our 30-day payment rates. So, and then the preceding 30-day payment rates to calculate what your payment rate's going to be for a given 30-day period, we have to adjust it for labor and non-labor. Okay, then the labor portion of that rate, we have to adjust by the CBSA service area wage index and the patient encounters case mix weight. And this prescribed calculation identifies what the Medicare payment rate will be for that in every 30-day payment period for any agency anywhere in the program. And the above mechanics, and I'm talking about breaking the rate down to labor, non-labor, and the wage index, is also used for calculating the LUPA per visit rates for every CBSA service area. So next, we're going to look at the LUPA rates for 2022. And each CBSA service area will have its own per visit LUPA rates. Okay, and these come into play for calculating both the LUPA revenue for a LUPA situation, which is obvious, but which is less obvious is they are also used to calculate imputed costs for an outlier situation. So when you have an outlier situation, they're using the LUPA rates to figure out what the encounter's costs were, not what your actual costs that you incurred. But I'll talk more about this a little bit later. As with the 30-day payment rates, CMS identifies LUPA per visit rates for agencies that do and those that do not submit the required quality data. For agencies that do submit the required quality data, here we have the disciplines over on the left-hand side. We can see the calculations, how we get over to the right-hand side. These are the standardized 30-day LUPA rates for 2022, and these are for agencies that submit the required quality data. And note in column 4, their update is 1.018. This is that same table for agencies that do not submit the required quality data. And note in column 4 that their adjustment is 2 percentage points lower at 0.998. Okay, now CMS has also historically paid what they call the LUPA add-on. The LUPA add-on is an additional dollar amount over and above the LUPA per visit rate to try to offset the administrative costs an agency will incur, but not have the full 30-day payment to cover those costs. You know, basically your assessment visit. So the LUPA add-on is an inflationary type factor applied to the LUPA per visit rate of the first visit's discipline LUPA rate. And I'll demonstrate that momentarily. Okay, the original LUPA add-on factors are remaining the same for 2022, and they are 1.8451 for skilled nursing, 1.67 for PT, and 1.6266 for speech. Now in the example, I'm saying, let's assume that we had 3 visits in this LUPA situation, and the first visit was a skilled nursing visit, followed by 2 PT visits. Following is how the revenue calculation would be. The first thing we need to do is calculate what the wage adjusted LUPA rates are for the service area. Here I've done this, okay? So skilled nursing and the PT rates. Then the revenue calculation would be as follows. We would take the first visit, which was a skilled nursing visit, the 132.13 times the LUPA add-on factor, the 1.8451. Multiply those together and we get 243.79 for that first visit, not just the 132.13. It gets inflated up to 243.79. Then we get the payment rates for the 2 PT visits, 144.42 times 2, 288.84. So the total LUPA revenue, including the add-on, is 532.63. But one thing I want to point out here is the LUPA add-on is only provided to the first 30-day period, is only available in the first 30-day period, pay period, in a string of 30-day pay periods, or it's the only 30-day pay period that you incur for that patient. If the LUPA happens on the second or subsequent 30-day pay periods in a string of contiguous 30-day pay periods, you do not get the LUPA add-on. However, this year there is a change with the LUPA add-on, okay? Because OT has now been approved to complete the first assessment visit, with the caveat, as long as skilled nursing is not in the original plan of care and PT and or ST are also involved. And since there was not an OT LUPA add-on factor, CMS has decided to establish a LUPA add-on factor. However, CMS doesn't feel that there's enough information, enough data to identify what that factor will be. So they propose to use the PT rate of 1.67 until they have more data to calculate a more accurate OT LUPA add-on factor. And in a nutshell, I guess that's a little bit better because the PT rate is higher than the ST rate, LUPA add-on factor. The rural add-on. This is a big one, okay? Because calendar year 2022 is legislated to be the last year of the rule add-on. This provision is scheduled to sunset on December 31st of 2022. So this table that I've taken out of the proposed rule is something that CMS created in 2018 and was implemented in 2019. And it identifies over on the left-hand side 3 categories of rural counties. The high utilization counties, and those are the most densely populated of the rural counties. The next one is the low population density, and that's the exact opposite of the range. So they have the lowest population density of the rural counties. And then the third row is all others, and those are all the rural counties that don't fit into the higher low populations. Okay, so and then we can see what the rural add-on was for 2019, 20, 21, and 22. When we look at 22, we see that only low population density is receiving a rural add-on for 2022, and it is only 1%. So if you believe that the rural add-on is necessary for services provided in rural America, then I say that there are 2 things that you should do. The first one is you should submit a comment to CMS to this proposed rule requesting that the rural add-on be extended, and I would recommend for all 3 categories. And the second is that you must contact your federal senators and members of the House requesting them to have CMS reestablish the rural add-on as part of the home health benefit. The first one where I say you should, it's because we're sending that into CMS. CMS is just going to turn around and say, well, we can't because this is a legislative item. This is a law of the land and we can't change the law of the land. But we want to put CMS on notice that the industry is pushing to have this done. Secondly, I say you must contact your federal senators and members of the House because these are the people that write the laws. Okay, so they're the ones that are going to have to legislate it that the rural add-on be extended. Outliers. Okay, this one's always been a pet peeve of mine. Okay, and that's why I say outliers, a benefit at 1 cost. To digress momentarily, years ago, when this big change first came out, I had a presentation that I did that was just on the outliers, the changes with the outliers. And it was called Outliers, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And so I talk about 3 different aspects of the outlier provision. And you will understand that I am not a proponent of the outliers because initially my good aspect of the outliers is the concept of the outliers. But when we get into the mechanics of the outliers, that's where I think it's more detrimental than people understand. And that's where the bad and the ugly come into play. So that's why I say a benefit at what cost. So I considered a couple polling questions here, but decided against it due to time constraints. But I considered that because of what I have found to be a complete lack of understanding of how the outlier provision works and its impact on your Medicare revenues, your Medicare cash flow. Okay, the issue is that almost everyone thinks that the outlier provision is good because they receive and they see that they receive outlier payments. You see it show up on your remittance advice, you see the payments going into the bank. What they don't realize, what they fail to understand is that all their Medicare payments are 5% less than what they would have been if the outlier provision did not exist. Consider this. Projected home health spending each year is reduced 5% to fund the outlier provision. Okay, so initially CMS gets this bucket of money. That's 100% of home health spending for the subsequent year. From that, they're going to reach in and they're going to take 5% out and they're going to put it into this other bucket. So now we have 2 buckets, one that has 95% of home health spending and one that has 5% of home health spending. But outlier payments to the industry are capped at 2.5% of home health spending. And we have this bucket, this smaller bucket here, that has 5% of home health spending. So CMS then has to take half of the monies out of that bucket and put it into a third bucket. Okay, so we have this first bucket, the big bucket, which is 95% of home health spending, which is what is used to calculate what the national standardized 30-day rate is. Then we have this second bucket, which is 2.5% of home health spending, which is what CMS says can be used as outlier payments. It can be used up to that amount. Historically, they generally don't even get to that amount. And then there's this other 2.5% of home health spending that's been taken away that's just sitting off here on the side. And this 2.5% is potential funds to the home health industry that are eliminated from home health spending before any monies are ever paid to the industry. Now, when I was talking about my previous webinar back in the day, where I said I had the good, the bad, and the ugly, this was the ugly, okay? Because it's taken 2.5% of home health spending and just taking it away from us right off the bat. It's disappearing, and we're not going to see that ever again in any shape or form. And that 2.5% of this lost home health spending, which they say is not a cut, but obviously is, was due to another section of the Affordable Care Act, the act that just keeps on giving or taking, as it were, and has been occurring since 2011. So 2022 will be year number 12 of this disparity, which cost the industry approximately $450 million per year. Yeah, so we're going to be over $5 billion in 2022 in lost home health spending because of this. As highlighted from the excerpt of the proposed rule that I have here, it says, as we noted, we being CMS, in the 2011 PPS final rule, the Affordable Care Act amended the home health PPS payment rates such that the aggregate PPS payment rates were reduced by 5%. And that's because of the outlier provision. In addition, the Affordable Care Act revised the language to state that the total amount of additional payments could not exceed 2.5% of the estimated total home health PPS payments for that year. So they're taking away 5% of home health spending, but they're putting a cap of 2.5% that can come back. Half of that can come back as outlier payments, meaning the other half of that 5% that was taken away disappears. And there was another section of the act which capped outlier payments at 10% for any agency. Total Medicare payments that any agency could receive in any given year was capped at 10%. So again, this is the ugly, because that's big dollars that they're taking away from us every single year. Now, looking at it from an agency-specific perspective, okay, most everybody thinks that the outlier provision is good because most do receive at least some outlier payments during the year. But I'm saying that outlier encounters all but guarantee a loss for most agencies for that 30-day service period, even after receipt of the outlier payment, unless your cost per visit by discipline are less than your LUPA per visit rates, which for almost all agencies in the program is not the case, and you provide no chargeable medical supplies during the encounter, as the cost of chargeable medical supplies are completely ignored in the outlier calculation. So think about that in regards to patients who are wound care patients, diabetic, ostomy, other type of patients who use high volumes or expensive chargeable medical supplies. Oh, and this, where I'm talking about, the agency specific approach, where they're using the LUPA rates as opposed to your actual cost per visit, this was the bad. in my presentation, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. You almost must consider, when you're looking at it from your agency's perspective, you must consider the outlier payments that you received versus how much was withheld, and it's been 5% since 2011, to fund the outlier provision. And it's my opinion that 95+% of all agencies have more withheld to fund the outlier provision than they receive in outlier payments. The issue is you don't see the 5% that's withheld because that's done before anything happens, okay? But you do see the outlier payments as they show up. So you don't see the negative, all you see is the positive. So there's a natural inclination to think that the outlier provision is beneficial. In other words, let's put some numbers to this, okay? An agency may receive $15,000 in outlier payments and think it's good, while failing to consider the $100,000 in potential Medicare revenues withheld because of the 5% withhold to fund the outlier provision. So even though the agency received $15,000 in outlier payments, they still lost $85,000 in potential Medicare revenues because of the outlier provision. Meaning, had the outlier provision not existed, they would have lost the $15,000 in outlier payments. They wouldn't have received those, okay? But they would have realized an increase in their Medicare revenues of $100,000 for a net pickup of $85,000. So they would have been $85,000 to the good. And it's my conjecture that 95% of the agencies would follow this same principle, not necessarily the same dollar amounts. That's why I say a benefit at what cost? I believe everyone should look back at their last handful of cost reports to see what the impact has been to them with their Medicare revenues, their Medicare cash flows. And if you, like I expect 95+% of all agencies in the program, are losing monies due to the outlier provision, consider submitting a comment to CMS for this proposed rule requesting that CMS eliminate the outlier provision as part of home health reimbursement. A couple of more points on the outlier provision and its calculations, okay? Again, an outlier's actual costs for an encounter are not considered in the outlier calculations, okay? First, any and all costs of medical supplies are ignored, as I said, and imputed costs are used. And this has to do with the bad, when I said the presentation, the good, the bad, the ugly, because they're using the LUPA rate times your discipline visits to calculate what the encounter costs are, not what your actual cost per visit by discipline is. A couple more points. The fixed dollar loss is set at 41% for calendar year 2022. That is the loss threshold. You must lose 41% over and above what the basic 30-day payment rate would be for that before any outlier payments would start kicking in. And then the outlier payments are this loss sharing ratio, meaning that of the amount that you lose over and above the 41% fixed dollar loss threshold, Medicare will pay you 80% of the amount that exceeds that 41% loss threshold. And here I just have the extract from the proposed rule that's identifying in this highlighted portion, the loss sharing ratio of 0.8, 80%, and the fixed dollar loss, which is the loss threshold of 0.41 for 2022. Next, we're going to take a look at allowed practitioners. Okay, this is something that the industry has been working on pushing to expand for years. Okay, and apparently it took COVID-19 pandemic for the powers that be to finally see the value in these sought out changes. In my opinion, this would be a good area for comment and one in which we could thank CMS for this advancement, okay, which would only help with us trying to provide the care that we're out there trying to do. This is the text from this proposed rule. And in the highlighted section, going down to the second line, it says this included defining a nurse practitioner, a clinical nurse specialist, and a physician assistant as allowed practitioners. So then these individuals basically have the same rights as a doc in referring, overseeing, and managing patient care in home health, including the face-to-face. And they're saying that in this last sentence that's highlighted, you know, these regulation tech changes are not time limited to the period of the public health emergency. In other words, they're permanent. The last section I want to talk about, the proposed rule with any detail, is the home health value-based purchasing model. Okay, the home health value-based purchasing demonstration started in 9 states in 2016: Arizona, Florida, Iowa, Massachusetts, Maryland, Nebraska, North Carolina, Tennessee, Washington. The first 2 years of this demonstration were just collecting data. They were performance years. And there were actually 5 performance years. 2016 and 2017 were the first 2 years. The next 3 years were also performance years, but those were also years in which the revenue impact started to occur for the agencies in the demonstration. And then the last 2 years, 2021 and next year, 2022, were going to be the last 2 years of the revenue impacts. Now, CMS noted at the beginning of this year that the value-based purchasing demonstration in home health had thus far seen a 4.6% improvement in the home health quality scores of the participating agencies, as well as an average annual savings to the Medicare program of $141 million. So CMS is proposing to expand the program to all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and all territories starting January 1, 2022. And they're initially proposing to have the revenue impact be up to a plus or minus 5% of Medicare payments to any and all agencies. Following are the additional proposals for this expansion. 2022 would be the first performance year for all, meaning those agencies that are currently in the demonstration would end if this gets finalized. The demonstration would end at the end of 2021, and at the beginning of January 1, 2022, everybody's going to be starting over at square one. And 2022 would be the first performance year. 2024 would be the start of the payment adjustments. Okay, and would be based on the agency's performance in 2022. And the payment rate adjustment factor can go up and down each year for any given agency based on that agency's performance results of 2 years prior, meaning 2022 performance impacts 2024 revenue, 2023 performance impacts 2025 revenue, and so on. And CMS would consider adjusting the revenue factors to plus or minus 5% in future proposed rules. So each agency would have its own unique payment rate adjustment factor associated with it for each year. And that factor would be applied to all Medicare revenue received that year, including any outlier and LUPA payments. So, and again, these revenue adjustment factors would range somewhere between plus 5% to minus 5%, and any rate in between. Most are going to be in the middle. You know, they're not going to, or they're going to be somewhere in between there. There's going to be very few, if any, that are actually at the extremes. So, and there will actually be some agencies each year that have a revenue adjustment factor of 0% in a given year. But, you know, whatever your factor is in this year has no impact on what that factor is going to be next year, because that's based on your performance scores from 2 years ago. Now, one big difference between the current demo and the expansion as proposed by CMS is currently the demonstration is segregated by state, meaning that agencies in Florida are only competing against other agencies in Florida. Agencies in Massachusetts are only competing against other agencies in Massachusetts, so on. And each state has its own large and small cohort. So that makes 18, 9 large and 9 small cohorts. Cohorts, just another name for a group. Okay, CMS is proposing that there only be 2 cohorts nationwide going forward. 1 cohort for all agencies in the large group and 1 cohort for all agencies in the small group. And that's what they're saying right here in this proposed rule. and whether an agency belongs to the large or small cohort would be based on the age caps and OASIS submissions for that agency. If adopted, this proposal, again, will not impact Medicare payments in 2022 or 2023, as those years will be performance years. Agencies will start to see the impact of their Medicare payments beginning in 2024 and every year thereafter. Now, there's a lot to this proposal, and the agencies operating in those 9 demo states do have an advantage for the most part, as they already understand the rules of the game. Okay, but to go into all the detail needed would require a separate presentation on its own. And even then, it's still going to be a big picture presentation. The details of this proposal can be found in section 3 of the proposed rule. And you should have either received or have access to the bookmarked proposed rule for 2022 out there. Okay, that I bookmarked. And if you get that, it's going to be on pages 53 through 94 of this 200-page document. Next, we're going to take a look at some other areas in this proposed rule, which CMS is proposing some changes, but I'm not going into the details about that. Okay, the first one is going to be HHQRP. That's going to be in section 4 of the proposed rule. Home infusion therapy services in section 5. I think that mostly has to do with payment rates. Medicare provider and supplier enrollment changes, section 6, and survey and enforcement requirements for hospice programs, which is section 7 of the proposed rule. Lastly, I want to conclude with a brief overview of the rulemaking process. In a nutshell, the rulemaking process is where the regulatory body overseeing a segment of governmental spending, CMS for us and Medicare, proposes a rule change. If the rule is material enough, then it must be put out to the public for an open comment period. And this is almost always the case for any proposed changes that come from CMS. Generally, we being the stakeholders and any interested parties, are given 30 to 60 days to review and comment on the proposed rule. And I will tell you, commenting works. There's a long history of commenting and the positive results of it. There are those out there that are naysayers, but I'm telling you that commenting works. We don't always get everything we want, but it does have an impact on the final rule. Remember when PDGM first started, CMS was proposing an 8.01% reduction for a behavioral adjustment to home health spending. And because of the comments submitted, that got reduced to 4.36. We would have liked for that to have been eliminated or reduced even smaller, but at least it got reduced to 4.36%. So once the open comment period has closed, CMS then reviews the submitted comments, addresses those comments, and submits their final rule, which they publish in the Federal Register. Unfortunately, the industry, the home health industry stakeholders have been far too lax in taking advantage of this opportunity to positively impact its own future. Okay, going back to 1998, when CMS proposed introducing the per beneficiary cost limit as part of the interim payment system, there were only 125 comments submitted. This is an excerpt from the final rule from 1998. And we're going to look at the first line and the last 2 lines. And it says, we received 125 comments addressing the implementation of the per beneficiary limit. 125 comments at a time when there were over 12,500 operating, not licensed, operating Medicare certified home health agencies. However, that changed over the next 5 years, okay? Because by the end of 2003, interim payment system and the PBL had caused almost 40% of all agencies at the start of 1998 to have closed or decertified by the end of 2003. And that's why whenever you see CMS talking about the number of agencies and doing any kind of comparisons, they always look at 2003. They compare to 2003. They don't look at what it was in 1997, 1998, pre-IPS, because the numbers were just as big or bigger back then than what they are right now. But 2003 was the low point. And then since 2003, we were in PPS, we could make a profit and the number of agencies has grown, or it grew for a significant period of time. Okay. My question is do you think, because there were 5,000 or so agencies, over 5,000 agencies that ended up closing to certify it, that had wished sometime in 1999 to 2003, while they were struggling before they ended up closing, wished that they had submitted comments back in 1998 when they had an opportunity to try to reduce the dire impact the changes proposed in 1998 ultimately had on their agencies. In 2014, CMS proposed rebasing reimbursement, which was the biggest proposed change to home health reimbursement since the inception of PPS back in 2000. There were only 100 comments submitted. Oh, by the way, 2014 was also the first year since 2003 that there were fewer certified agencies at the end of the year than there were at the start. Now, it wasn't nearly as dramatic as what happened under IPS and the per bene limit, but the number of agencies has been consistently decreasing since 2014. 2016, we had the pre-claim review, which was originally called the prior authorization demonstration. There were approximately 200 comments submitted for that. Ask any agency that's having to go through pre-claim review. They're not happy that that thing exists. In 2020, PDGM was proposed for 2020, in 2019, okay? There were 1,345 comments submitted, a high watermark for the industry, okay? But this was at a period of time when there were over 11,500 certified agencies, let alone all the other stakeholders that exist out there. And most of those comments were not by home health agencies. And I would say probably pushing anywhere from 30 to 50% of those comments were of the copy and paste variety, which I believe is detrimental to trying to create change. It's not beneficial. Just driving that number up artificially, if people aren't going to take the time to reword a comment that they're borrowing from somebody else, then I think CMS just discounts those comments. Now, I've spoken around the country in person and virtually for years. And one thing that's always surprised me is the number of individuals in home health that did not know that this opportunity exists, our ability to participate in the rulemaking process. And I think part of that falls on the shoulders of, the big associations and everybody else that's out there trying to educate the industry, because we have not pushed the importance of industry participation in the rulemaking process. But that's one of the things that I've been doing for years to try to counteract that lack of knowledge. Okay, now you can submit your comments as a representative of your agency, as an individual, but not representative to an agency. You can even send your comments anonymously. I have even seen beneficiaries that have submitted comments. Okay, and comments can be mailed, they can be overnighted, they can be even submitted electronically, which is far and away the easiest way. Okay, that's how I do it now since that's become available. And this is excerpted from the proposed rule. And one thing I want to point out is that comments must be received by next Friday, August 27th. Okay, and when you submit comments, however you send it in that document or what you're typing, you want to refer to file code CMS-1747-P, because that identifies that your comments are associated with this rule. Okay, and as I say over on the side, we can send them in electronically, by regular mail, by express or overnight mail. It identifies the address to use regarding on the approach that you do. And if you submit electronically, which I recommend, you can see it identifies what the URL, this link takes you to this page. Okay, and in this section, you type in CMS-1747-P and you will click search. And when you click search, it will take you to this page. This is only a portion of the page, but you can see that we have this area that says comment. Okay, so you click on comment and you're ready to go. And at that point in time, you can comment, you can type your comment directly on that page that it takes you to, Or if you've already created a document, a Word document, a PDF document, an email, whatever, and you want to submit it as an attachment, you can drag and drop that attachment at that page. And that's generally how I do it at each year. And you can actually submit up to 20 attachments at any one given time. And as previously noted, CMS wants you, they ask, tell us about yourself. So you can identify yourself as an individual, not associated with an organization. You can identify yourself as an organization, and you can identify as anonymous, so no entity is associated with this. Okay, this, in my mind, is real advocacy for the industry, and it does make a difference. And you can have a selfish perspective in your approach, in that I believe that what is good for the specific agency is almost always going to be good for the industry. So I would request that you consider submitting comments this year, and as long as you continue to operate in home health. This page, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it is just a list I wanted to provide to you that's going to be talking about different sections, different concepts in this proposed rule that, in my mind, are worthy of comment. You don't have to comment on any of them. You can just pick one and just comment on that, okay? But I'm identifying in this what section in the proposed rule these different areas are at, and what pages within those sections these different areas are at. Okay, so just pick different areas you want to comment on. Pick those areas that fit in your wheelhouse. So we identified all and discussed most of the areas in which CMS is proposing changes for 2022, including the various payment provisions under PPS, such as home health spending, the market basket update, no pay wraps, the NOAs, the wage index, case mix wage, 30-day payment rates, LUPA add-ons, the rule add-on, and outliers. And we also discussed proposed changes to allowed practitioners and program-wide expansion of the value-based purchasing model. I identified other areas of change, but I didn't go into detail, such as HHQRP, home infusion therapy services, Medicare provider and supplier enrollment changes, and the survey and enforcement requirements for hospice programs. And I closed out the presentation talking about the rulemaking process, how rules are first proposed by CMS, that we interested stakeholders then have a limited time to submit comments to try to influence the rule, which I recommend everyone to take advantage of. And CMS's review of the comments submitted, and ultimately CMS's publication of their final rule in the Federal Register. So I know we went over a lot in a fairly short period of time. So I want to thank you for your time and attention. And now I want to pass it back to Hannah, because we'll open it up for Q&A.
All right, so we have had a few questions submitted, and I'll just kind of go through. Also wanted to answer, there is a copy of the slides at the very beginning of the chat. I can drop those in again, but if you go up to the top, you should be able to download that PDF if you want the notes from today's webinar. So John, a few questions. So are you saying that we can never expect that the percent of change indicated by CMS in the proposed or final rule for any year will be the percent change that we can actually expect in our Medicare revenues?
Yes.
I'll also send that. I'll put that in the chat as well.
Yes, it's going to, I mean, like I said in the presentation, about 20 to 30% of the agencies out there will see a change in their revenue that's going to coincide with the change of home health spending for any given year, meaning 70 to 80% of the agencies will not. And if you want to know what that change is going to be with any degree of accuracy, you're going to have to calculate it out yourself. And I would also say that just because your change in revenue coincides in 1 year with what CMS says is going to be a change in home health spending, that has no impact on whether that's going to occur in the following year.
Okay, and I had put another question in the chat above, do you think it's a bad idea for an agency to send any comments on their letterhead? Would that have any negative impact on that agency?
I would say 99.9% of the time, no. You know, as long as your comments are professional and you're trying to make a point without being confrontational and caustic, then no. It doesn't mean that you can't be adversarial, but if you're going to be adversarial, you want to do it with some professional tact, okay? Because periodically some of my comments will be a little bit adversarial because I think they're so far off base. But generally speaking, I would say no. And what you could do, if you did have a series of comments you wanted to submit, and most of them were more tactful, and there was one or two areas that were a little bit more biting, you could put the more tactful ones in on your letterhead, submit that, and then send the other ones in anonymously.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. Do you expect CMS to implement another behavior assumption adjustment in the final rule for 2022 or in future years?
In future years, I would guarantee it. I would say with 100% certainty, it's going to happen. You know, whether it happens in 2023 or 2024, unsure, but I would bet the ranch that it's going to happen in at least one of those years, if not both. The chances of it happening here in 2022, I would think is not very high because they did not propose it, even though they did identify it in this proposed rule.
Okay, let me see. Next question. How can reimbursement rates increase or decrease by as much as 35% when CMS indicates that the increase for the calendar year 2022 is projected to be 1.7%?
Okay, what CMS is identifying is the change in home health spending. How much monies are going to be allocated to Medicare home health for the upcoming year as compared to the prior year. So that's where the 1.7% comes in. The reason that there can be such variability between increases and decreases vis-a-vis the increase in home health spending is the mechanics of the 30-day payment rate calculation. You know, so if you're in a service area and you have a wage index that drops from 21 to 22, and this case mix weight for this patient that you're seeing is that one that's going to drop 27%, then that's really going to gut that reimbursement rate for that specific case mix weight. Same thing with an increase. You might be in a service area where you have a nice increase in the wage index, and you're dealing with a specific case mix weight, a specific HIPS code that has a nice increase from 2021 to 2022. So that's what would drive the reimbursement rate for that 30-day period to be so significantly higher than what the change is projected to be in home health spending. And that's why I say that agencies should be calculating what this is every year. Okay, and I take that a step further, that, you know, in my mind, all agencies should be doing an annual budget, projecting out what they're, you know, doing a budget, just like any other business should be doing a budget. Most agencies in the industry don't, to their own detriment. But if you are going to do a budget, you want to be able to accurately as possible, project out what the revenue impact is going to be.
Okay, let me see if I see any other questions. I know we're getting close to time. Okay, the wage index for 3 of our service areas is proposed to decrease for calendar year 2022. Does that mean that we can expect to see the increase in our Medicare payment rates to be less than the 1.7% as identified by CMS?
Well, first off, I would congratulate you for knowing that the wage index is decreasing for your service areas, or knowing what the change is. I would certainly say it's going to make providing services in those 3 service areas a little bit more challenging, and say that it's probably a safe bet, but not a guaranteed bet that your payment rates will decrease. I mean, your increase will either be less than the 1.7% that's projected for home health spending, or you could even have a decrease in your reimbursement rates, because again, the reduction in the wage indexes is going to have a negative impact on your wages comparing 21 to 22, but it's also going to depend on what the change in the case mix weights are that you historically use, comparing 21 and projecting out for 2022. Because if you have case mix weights that are increasing, it could offset the decrease that you're having in the wage indexes. But if your case mix weights on average are decreasing, coinciding with the wage index decrease, then you're probably looking at Medicare revenues that are going to be less in 2022 than what they were in 2021.
Okay, another question. If our LUPA episode percentages are less than what CMS identified, does that mean that we are doing well in this area?
That's sort of 2 sides of a coin. Initially, I would say yes, okay, because that is a good thing. Because you're having, because again, you're losing, somewhere between $750 and $2,500 every time you have a LUPA episode. So you want to reduce that to the nth degree. But I would also add a caveat to that, and I would recommend that you pull your PEPR report, which the latest ones just came out last month. And that's something I think less than half of the industry has actually pulled their PEPR reports that's available to them for free. And one of the things they look at that's identified in the PEPR report is the how many 30-day payment periods do you have where you hit right at the LUPA threshold, or only do 1 or maybe 2 more visits than the LUPA threshold, which they identify as something that could identify potential abuse in the program. So yes, that's doing well, but you want to make sure that everything you're doing is justified clinically in your documentation. And if that's the case, if you're very solid with this, the documentation you have in your clinical support, your clinical notes, then yes, you are doing better.
Okay. Are you saying that outliers are costing home health hundreds of millions of dollars every year? How is that possible? How can I identify how much this has impacted our agency for 2020 or over the years?
First question, yes. Okay, it is. It's taking away home health spending, which amounts to, in the $18 billion a year. 2.5% of that is being taken away every year. That's disappearing. That's just being completely eliminated from home health spending. So yes, that's taking hundreds of millions of dollars away from us every year, and has been since 2011. How can it be done? Well, again, it was part of it was included in the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act that was passed back in 2010. So it's been impacting us every year since 2011. This is not CMS, this is government that's doing this to us. CMS may have had an impact on that coming into place, but that's legislated. How you can take a look and see what the impact to your agency is go back and look at your prior cost reports, okay? And look at how much revenue was paid to you for your non-outlier episodes, your basic episodic payments, okay? And then you just increase that for the 5% that was withheld. And then you compare what was on the cost report you received versus, and you must take into consideration sequestration, okay? And compared to what that amount was if you inflated it for the 5% that you didn't get, and that's how much was withheld from your agency to fund the outlier provision. Then you compare that number to what was identified on your cost report as outlier payments. And if you received more in outlier payments than what was withheld, then the outlier provision was beneficial to you. If you had more withheld than what you received, then it was detrimental.
Okay,
I can tell you that since 2011, the amount that was withheld was 5%. Going back beyond 2010, then you have to look at the specific years because it fluctuated how much was being withheld, somewhere between 2.5% and 5%. But I will also say that during that period of time, pre the Affordable Care Act, the amount that was withheld to fund the outlier provision was also available to be paid back to the industry as outlier payments.
Okay, I'll do one last question since we're coming up on time here. Do you think that expanding the value-based performance model industry-wide will be a benefit or a curse to us in home health? And what's the key to succeeding under the value-based performance model?
Well, it's in a manner of speaking, it's going to be both a benefit and a curse, depending on your perspective and how it's impacting you. I can say that to really address the second part of the question first is that quality is key. Okay, so you want to have dynamite home health compare scores, star ratings, age caps, all that stuff you want to have, you want to do as well as possible, because the agencies that do well under value-based are the agencies that do well there. Okay, now it could be a benefit or a curse depending on where you fall on the spectrum, because in a simplistic sense, let's say that we have 3 segments of home health, okay, and we're going to put 40% of the agencies in the upper performing, we're going to put 40% of the agencies in the lower performing, and 20% of the agencies right in the middle. Okay, and that under value-based performance, we want to keep these ratios. This is a very simplistic presentation. It's not exactly how it works, but conceptually it's very close. Okay, so what's going to happen is monies are going to be taken away from the agencies that are in the 40% underperforming group. Those monies that are taken away from those agencies are going to go over and pay those agencies that are in the 40% of the upper performing group. And the 20% middling group is not going to be getting anything, in a manner of speaking. Okay, so what's going to happen over time is that agencies in the underperforming group are going to be getting hurt so bad financially that over years, the number of agencies in that group is going to decrease. As the number of agencies in that group decreases, that group no longer represents 40% of the agencies in home health. So what has to happen is there has to be a reallocation of agencies to all 3 groups. So some of the agencies from the middling group are going to slide down to the underperforming group. Some of the agencies from the upper performing group are going to slide down to the middling group to get us back into that balance of 40-20-40. Okay, and there's nothing to keep an agency from going from the underperforming group to the upper performing group. There's nothing to stop that. Okay, but in a conceptual sense, the agencies that are going to have the most difficult time conceptually are going to be the agencies who are getting reductions to their revenues, their Medicare revenues. And as that happens in the aggregate, there's going to be more agencies dropping down to that group than agencies that are in that group that are moving up to the other groups to try to keep that 40-20-40. So in that case, the agencies that are in that underperforming group are going to have a dogged time trying to keep their nose above water.
I see that we have reached the end of our time. So again, I want to thank you, John, for being on the call today. Thank you for the information, and thank all of you for participating. There's a short survey that should pop up at the end, and if you complete it, a little piece of candy will pop out of your computer. I'm just joking, wouldn't that be nice? But please fill out the survey, and then we would like to invite you to join any upcoming webinars, and you may now disconnect.